Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz, and winter workouts now through 3 weeks, one ahead, then it's spring break. We're shifting focus to spring practice soon after that. Before getting too far ahead of ourselves, the Penn State coaching staff, Sean, doing us a nice favor here for the topic of conversation, sprinkling out a few nuggets on social media as they do after these Tuesday and Thursday workout sessions. We're going to talk through some of that. You've had intel early on about Zane Durant. That was before any tweets from John Scott. Well, he was a two-time selection now as the performer of the day in that defensive line group. And why don't we start there? Because it's all aboard the hype train when it comes to the Florida prospect who's already, a month and a half into his career and getting this kind of attention.
Yeah, this is a physical specimen, really. I mean, he's not the biggest guy out there. He is the fastest among those defensive linemen or the defensive tackles right now. And we talked about this on our first episode this week. It's very curious to see if he can fit into that rotation because there's a lot of bodies going in there. Of course, PJ Mustipher, who you're going to have back for the season, but you don't expect to see in the spring. And you've got Izzard and Ellies who stepped up, and Hakeem Beeman's back. Jordan Vanderberg came out at the end of the year last year. I mean, Vanover played some defensive tackle as well. So there's a lot of bodies in there, but we've been saying that for the last couple of years from a scholarship perspective. There's a lot of bodies, but it seems like there's more productive bodies to work out. So gives John Scott a little bit of more flexibility there. Maybe you play Durant as that 5 tech. Maybe you try and get him, spice him in there. And maybe he doesn't have great length in terms of comparing him to the other defensive end prospects, but he's explosive. He's strong. And if you're playing, for instance, a team like Wisconsin at the front of your schedule, like they did last year, you want to work those guys, guys like Durant, guys like Vanover, potential tweeners / guys that are versatile, depending which side of the cupcake you want to ice there. But it's really remarkable to see an early enrollee freshman, and he was the first one. There was a couple others since then, but to see him pop up over and over again against that cast of characters like Ellies, like Izzard, those guys that have been around for a couple of years, I think it says something about his ability to compete. It says something about his ability to potentially take that ball and run with it and actually get some snaps at a position where it's not easy to break into that rotation and play a lot. I mean, we've seen guys that have come in and played as true freshmen. Mustipher himself did that. But to play a lot, to be a reliable guy, that still remains to be seen on what kind of impact he can have there. But really just tickled with the way that Durant has taken it upon himself to be one of the I guess you can call him standouts of winter workouts so far.
I mean, you've got Mustipher coming back, which is such a huge win for the defense and for coordinator Manny Diaz. And in his absence, you got Izzard and Ellie's a lot of reps. Specifically, I think Izzard really shone through as the season progressed. Hakeem Beeman, a wild card here. I mean, it's been a wild card subject for what feels like an entire year on this podcast. And then you've got this collection of guys that are ahead of Durant in terms of experience, and they've been on campus for a couple of years, or at least 1 year. And Jordan Vandenberg, who showed a hell of a motor last year, and that's one thing we kept hearing about him on the practice field, and saw that a little bit in some game action late. Fatorma Mulba, who's got all that strength, can that translate? Amin Vanover, that tweener kind of thing that we've talked about before, and Kevin Givens has been the comparison, who was that undersized defensive lineman. And I think you want to see 6 guys. You'd love to have 6 guys going into September where you feel like they can take on reps in Power 5 competition. They can play if they have to on the road against Auburn early in the year. They can play if they have to over the course of your Big Ten schedule. And you've got the numbers here. We've seen, some of the players exit via the portal, and Aeneas Hawkins retiring, but there seems to be a door open, I think, just based on experience, where Zane Durant, if he can keep it going in through 15 spring practice periods, that's a tough ask of any true freshman. That's the next step for him. But I think you look past that top 3 or 4 guys, unless this group adds a transfer player, there's room to maneuver there. And I'm sure John Scott would like to be able to go 6 deep. Not that you're going to spread out those snap distribution equally from guys 1 through 6.
Yeah, we were surprised by the transfer addition of Derek Tangelo last year, but it would be even more stunning this year to see them go that route for defensive tackle, just because you not only have bodies, but you have experienced bodies, competent bodies. Like we mentioned, Izzard and Ellies started the bowl game. Beeman's played a decent amount of football despite missing last year. And of course, Mustipher Vandenberg came on at the end of last year. You probably have the ability to put Amin Vanover back there at end to see if they can help out with those numbers, or see if he can help out with those numbers there. So you've got options, but you seem to have more proven options. You seem to have more talented options as you get out of that funk where they just kind of loaded up and threw numbers at the defensive tackle position. That's kind of what you're hoping for. So you hope, if you're Penn State's coaching staff, this is what you've finally gotten to that destination where you can, have a regular rotation of guys and not have a big drop off and things like that. So it'd be interesting to watch. I mean, because you've got guys like Mulba who, played some more early in the season last year and then eventually came back around, and by the end of the year was playing a little bit in the bowl game. You haven't heard a thing from Cole Brevard. I mean, I think he was the highest ranked out of all those guys, though. So you're starting to see defensive tackles. I don't want to say just out there like they were. I don't want to say they were just out there, but now you can certainly have a little bit more competition. You certainly have a little bit more depth, and with that comes flexibility, because you don't know what defensive end is going to look like. You don't know how those guys are going to factor in with the versatility of those tweeners, Beeman, like Beeman, Vanover, and eventually maybe Zane Duran as well. So you've got some options, which, if you're looking at this defense, you're certainly not looking at defensive tackle as a spot that needs reinforcements.
Well, through 5 winter workout sessions, Durant was the only early enrollee to get called out by a coach in a positive light. Called out sounds bad, but get shouted out by a coach on social media. It happened for him twice. No offensive players on that list. And then all of a sudden, a couple of them pop up Thursday morning, and we'll start at running back, because top running back in the country, according to 247 Sports, in the 2022 recruiting classes in those winter workouts, Nick Singleton gets the love from Jaywan Sider Thursday morning. And I spoke with Nick back in December following his Gatorade National Player of the Year award recognition, with Saquon Barkley presenting that to him. And he said straight up, Jaywan Sider told me to come in and go win the job. And Kevon Lee, as we talked about last week, the performer of the week at that position, or of the day at that position through the first 3 workouts. He's the guy who's got the experience the last couple of years. You would imagine he is, if it's not going to be Singleton, everyone's pointing to Kevon Lee. But here comes the freshman. And, obviously you would report this before anything from Sider out there on social media, that he is turning heads in the building early on.
Yeah, that piece on Durant was a dual piece, because it was Durant and Singleton were the 2 guys that really were turning heads for that coaching staff upon arrival. And it's not a surprise with Singleton. I mean, this is a kid that very strong, very close, to very high floor in terms of strength, in terms of power movements and things like that. So not a surprise. Kevon Lee's had a really good winter, as Sider has sort of reflected. And just from talking to people around the program, it seems like he's moved in that right direction as well. But I mean, Singleton's coming, man. I mean, I don't know what to say. This kid is really, really talented. 5-star kid, number 1 running back in the country by 247 Sports, All-American. You just list off the accolades: Gatorade National Player of the Year. Dude can play. So I'm going to be really interested to see. I think his ceiling is far beyond that of Kevon Lee, but Kevon Lee's got experience. Kevon Lee's been around for a while. So how long can he hold him off? We'll see. But Singleton's a guy they've been really excited about since he arrived, and I really haven't done anything to put that fire out. It's just a question: can you handle the, can you, first off, speaking of elite, can you not put the ball on the ground is huge. Can you pass protect? Can you pick up blitzes and identify coverages and things like that? The little things that you don't think about when you're talking about, just carrying the football through the hole and running for a touchdown. So really excited to see what Singleton's going to bring to the table. I think he's going to be a stud. He's just got so much going for him. I don't want to say it's a matter of when, not if, or if not when, or whatever however you want to say that, he takes over. But Kevon Lee's going to have to hold him off, I think, for all the things that we've heard about Nick Singleton. And let's face it, I'm excited. A playmaker in that backfield, was sorely missed last year, and I think Singleton brings that to the table.
And an aspect that he really showed off down at the All-American Bowl that I think really helped him get to that 5-star status and solidify himself there as a receiver. Some of the things he can do as a pass target, as that part of his game starts to become a burgeoning aspect of what he can do in his toolkit. Really curious there, because that's something that we haven't seen a lot of splashy plays come out of the receiving game for this running back unit the last couple of years. And Sean, meanwhile, in the getting the shout out, it was the other guy, as he's been known as, I feel like these days in the recruiting class, for the quarterback is Bo Pribula, the first in-state quarterback to sign with Penn State in 2010, wearing number 9. We talked about that earlier this week. Like the man he's compared to quite a bit, Trace McSorley. And he was the guy who got the shout out from Mike Yursich on Thursday morning.
Yeah, really happy to see that number 9 personally. I think Bo has that chip on his shoulder, whether he would admit it or not. Being the other guy is something that really, I think kind of drives him. And he's built for winter workouts. Let's be honest. He's a physical kid. I mean, we were talking about him potentially playing linebacker or safety a couple of years ago. So he's got the athletic tool set. It doesn't have the arm talent and the quarterback. So I don't want to say intangibles because Bo was phenomenal, but he doesn't have that tool set that Drew Aller has. So not surprised that he's come through here. We had a report, or actually I was talking about it in our chat last week on Lions247, just in terms of what he brings to the table and what the coaches think. The coaches love this kid, just in terms of him being it's been described to me as a machine, just a guy that works, just puts his head down and works. And at the quarterback position, that's just part of it. But to see this is kind of refreshing to hear about how he's come along and how he's made an impact on that room in the early going. Like I said, the coaching staff really big fans of Pribula. It remains to be seen when those pads go on where he stands in the glut of things, but he's got a lot going on for him right now in winter workouts, and it's excited to see. I think he's got that chip on his shoulder, as I said earlier. He's got that McSorley sort of vibe to him, and that's what it's going to take. I mean, Drew is a phenomenally talented kid, but that Michael O'Connor was a phenomenally talented kid. So, I mean, that's kind of where we're standing with Pribula. A long way off here because we still, I still have them at 3 and 4 behind Clifford and behind Christian Veilleux as well. We'll see in a couple of weeks. I can't wait to see these guys throw the ball.
All right, so through 3 weeks, Sean, those are the 3 early enrollees that we've heard about from the position coaches. It's Nick Singleton, it's Bo Pribula, it's Zane Durant twice over. Another thing that popped up this week that was particularly interesting was Zakee Wheatley. Now listed at cornerback, or now listed at safety after spending his freshman year at cornerback. And I didn't even notice that the roster had updated to reflect that until Anthony Poindexter tweeted out that his top performing safety of the day was Wheatley. So that's how I found out. That was Tuesday morning. And this is an interesting addition to the safety room. It felt like a loss that the cornerback room can afford. And this is one of those rangy defensive backs. And this is a conversation we've had a lot with the 2022 prospects that are going to arrive later this year, where you've got this versatility. And a lot of it is going to depend not only on what you're seeing from them on the practice field and their personal development, but from your personnel development and what you have to work with in the back end of your defense.
Yeah, this is an expected move, one we've been waiting for a while, because he came out as a corner, didn't play last year. Well, played in 4 games last year, but didn't work his way into the rotation. But they were pleasantly surprised by his development in terms of what he was able to do. He's so long. You see him out there. He's all arms and legs. And that's kind of the way he's always been. But he was recruited as a safety prospect. And this one, as you said, makes sense from a numbers standpoint, because you've got, what you feel are probably 4 corners right now. And 3 safeties. So you're trying to fill out that two deep and figure out who the guy would be behind Jair Brown, along with Jalen Reed and Keaton Ellis in there as well. And Wheatley's a guy that's been impressive. He's just got that long frame to fill out. I think speed is a question, no doubt about it. That's always been kind of the hang up with him. Always had great ball skills, always was around the football and things like that. Of course, did not play his senior year of high school because of COVID. So but they were impressed with what he brought to the table last year. Got him a chance to learn some coverage things at corner, which, when Penn State tries to play 3 safeties, you might slide a safety down there as a nickel corner or something, where you might find a guy, just kind of on an island by himself. So it helps to have those corner skills. So for a guy that wasn't going to come in and play right away like Wheatley, to get him some experience there, I think makes sense. And I think they continue to do that as a program. So, yeah, I think he'll factor in right away. I mean, he's a guy that can potentially be in the 2 deep right now. You're still trying to figure out before guys like Christian Driver and KJ Winston especially get to campus and see what happens there. What you're going to do about your safety rotation. I mean, I don't think he's going to unseat Jair Brown anytime soon, but let's face it, Keaton Ellis and Jalen Reed, while they have, their talented prospects that don't have a ton of experience. So this will be an opportunity for him to sort of get in that mix as well. And it's funny to see him because when he's out there in pads, especially with the corners, which are a little bit shorter, I mean, he's kind of in that Joey Porter mold where he's just like, he's got arms all over the place. And to see him sort of just kind of cover back there as a center fielder, it'll be interesting to see. Like I said, speed is not his forte, but he can cover a lot of ground with that length that he has.
Down in Tampa before the Outback Bowl, we did hear from Joey Porter, and that's what he said. He said, Wheatley is built just like me. And those long limbs, such a big part of what we talked about with Porter, apply a lot of that to this situation. And I think the interesting thing here, obviously, is at safety, it's an incomplete process because you got all these names, 4-star signees. Christian Driver, Mekhi Flowers, KJ Winston, Tyrese Mills coming from Lackawanna. There's a lot still coming. What we're seeing here in the spring bowl, and you wrote about this in an evolving defensive backfield. I think with Wheatley heading over to safety, the cornerback room, I think you're getting a pretty clear picture about the hierarchy there. Kind of too deep in that situation. Jeffrey Davis is a year 2 guy that we haven't talked much about. Of course, Kalen King stole the show as a year 1 player. Daquan Hardy's covering in the nickel. Whereas in the safety room, it projects as a lot of different body types, a lot of different, I think, players that some programs and maybe this staff would project as a cornerback long-term. And so I think Anthony Poindexter in year 2, a guy that we thought was going to be the head coach at Virginia a couple months ago, really a melting pot of a group to work with, I think, and not a lot of known variables once you get past Jair Brown, to be honest with you. Even with Keaton Ellis, who started in the Outback Bowl, last year was a transition year. He was nicked up. We didn't really get a full look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's it's going to be interesting to see how they find a complement to Brown, because if they do go with a guy like Jalen Reed, he's kind of like Brown in that he fills and plays downhill. Ellis a little bit longer and faster. Zakee Wheatley a little bit longer as well, so a little rangier. So if you were splitting them up, I think you could go 2 and 2, but I don't know that they're going to have that luxury, because if you're looking for the best guy to be opposite Brown, is that going to be Reed, who's a similar player? Is that going to be Ellis, or is it going to be Wheatley? I don't know. So it's certainly intrigued there, but you feel pretty decent about the athleticism and the bodies that you have there. To me, the question in the defensive backfield, what's Jair Brown going to be like with these new responsibilities? I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy playing beside Jaquan Brisker, but teams knew where Brisker was. Offensive coordinators were scheming around Brisker and things like that. Brown's going to be that guy now, so it's going to hopefully benefit the other guy in that situation. So it'll be fun. And then, of course, we don't talk enough about Daquan Hardy in the season that he had last year, so that's going to be a factor that goes into that. As you saw, Jonathan Sutherland was singled out this week as a linebacker once again. That's just I think it's part of that big picture talk with the defense. How often do you see Hardy out there versus how often do you see Sutherland out there, or whoever the Sam guy or whatever they're calling the position under Manny Diaz is going to be. So some interesting little subplots there. Again, you're feeling pretty decent about the front part of your defense, pretty decent about the back part. Plenty of questions to talk about with the linebackers moving forward. But before we move on, don't forget about the former kicker who's out there. You wouldn't let me. Yeah. I would not let you skip him.
Yeah, well, I mean, look. So at linebacker, you've seen a couple guys get 2-time recognition from their position coach. You mentioned Jonathan Sutherland, also Curtis Jacobs. At safety, there's a couple guys. Jair Brown. Okay, everyone could see that coming. The other guy to get 2 shout-outs from Anthony Poindexter, Sebastian Costantini. And I'm at this point, I hope I'm saying that correctly. I don't think I am, because it's not a name that I've said on this podcast much. You wrote about it a couple summers ago. Oh, nice little story, moving from kicker to defensive back. Okay, here we are 2 years later. He's getting specifically shouted out on multiple occasions, twice in the past week, by Anthony Poindexter, a former All-American safety. So what do we make of this?
They love this kid, man. I don't know if he's going to dent the depth chart and play right away, but I mean, this is a kid. He came in as a kicker. He got here as a kicker, and I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but he absolutely tested off the charts, not just for a kicker, but he was more athletic than some of their scholarship skill guys. So what happens is, I think it was 2020 because I was just searching for things to write about. But
It was.
Costantini moved from kicker to corner and, did a pretty good job. I mean, he was a good high school player, but did a pretty good job. And then, of course, they moved him over to safety. I was talking to Terry Smith. That was at a media day or something like that. He didn't want to lose him. He didn't want to lose Costantini from the corners to the safeties, but he had to give him up. Of course, Terry never wants to lose anybody to any other position. So that kind of makes sense. But yeah, this special teams kid, a guy that you can potentially, I see him as a guy that's in the mix for one of those like 1-year scholarships that, has worked his tail off and has done a really good job. And really has the respect of everybody in that building. So be interesting to see where he fits into does he take Drew Hartlob's spot? Is he a gunner or something like that? I mean, there's certainly questions where you could align his story to other walk-on stories, but it's a good one and it's worth mentioning. You don't see too many guys that were former kickers that eventually make an impact in the defensive backfield or on special teams in a different way.
While I'm listening to you, I'm also reading you from the dark days of March 2020, as you referenced your story here. Some of those numbers that you mentioned, and by the way, when he's at Malvern Prep, he set a program record there in the discus, the 55-meter hurdles, pole vault, decathlon. He was in the Penn relays, 37-inch vertical paired with a 4.16 second short shuttle upon his arrival on campus at the kicker position.
That's pretty unbelievable, man. And I was going to make a Lonnie White joke, but it's not coming to me. But no, it's pretty unbelievable. Like I remember, hearing about those numbers when he arrived on campus, and I'm like, this kid is a kicker. But it was pretty awesome to see that. But like I said, I don't know where he's going to pop up in terms of getting reps and things like that. But I mean, this is a kid chasing his dream. Committed to Penn State back in 2018, and really. Was really excited about the prospects of coming and making a dent on the program. He thought he'd do it with his foot, but apparently he's doing it in other ways.
One other name I wanted to get to here because he was given the dominating tag by Terry Smith today is Kalen King. Terry Smith says he is dominating cornerback workouts this winter. He has been the cornerback pick for performer of the day all but one occasion this month, as Terry Smith has announced those. That's great to see because around this time last year, we started to really hear that Kalen King was on his way to turning heads by the time spring ball wrapped up and he was out there picking off passes in front of a crowd in Beaver Stadium. This guy was legitimately going to get that green light, and he did. He played all 13 games because of what cornerback was for the team and overall strength and the experience he had there. Didn't need to throw him out there and play a ton of reps, but worked his way into that rotation, was the starter in the Outback Bowl with Castro Field sideline. And now you're certainly looking for him to be one of the ascending figures on this roster. So early returns on the start of this sophomore year for Kalen King, overwhelmingly strong from Terry Smith thus far.
Yeah. And when we talk about, I guess holding caution for true freshmen to make an impact. This is what we talk about. Kalen King was phenomenal last spring. In not only in the stuff that we had heard, but also we got to see him. He had a pick 6 in the one scrimmage that we got to see. Sort of was the icing on the hype cake there. And then came in, and there were guys in front of him that were entrenched that actually played really well. And unfortunately for King, I think everybody's going to remember him running into a teammate there against Michigan. And then, that's kind of where the season, went the way it went. And, but I think he rebounded well. I thought he actually played well out of that. So, interested to see what he does opposite Porter. Of course, I think teams are going to go after both those guys this year, and, they're really talented guys. And I'm kind of beat the drum for Joey Porter once again. I know he had the penalties and everything down the stretch last year. He's a really talented guy as well. So corner is not an issue to me. You got to cultivate some depth, see what you got with Johnny Dixon, see what Marquise Wilson can bring to the table. I know we had a question a couple weeks ago on the mailbag about a veteran that could kind of turn the corner. Marquise Wilson could be that guy, after what we saw.
Wilson.
What we saw from him as a true freshman. And then that's a weird career arc, but that's kind of where he's at right now. And if he can break through, that would be great for that. So but Kalen King is going to have an opportunity. We know he's got the swagger. We know he's got the confidence in his abilities. So I'm curious to see what he can do when he gets past that freshman wall and can take that next step.
I'm guilty of not bringing up the name Marquise Wilson nearly often enough when we discuss the cornerback room. I think I just had applied him to this athlete dual
Well,
threat.
that's the problem.
And
He's still listed as an athlete on the
right.
on the roster. So if you go to like search for CB or WR as we're going through our position previews and things like that, he doesn't pop up. You just forget about him, and that's kind of how it's gone the last 2 years with Marquise Wilson, unfortunately.
So the Kalen King hype train is back in full speed ahead, and we'll see how he responds to what should be an expanded opportunity. Anything else to mention here through 3 weeks of winter workouts? I feel like we've kind of dug through quite a bit here, and you had some reports early on last week, and then we're in spring break, and then these guys are putting on pads soon. Any other names that we need to be mentioning?
I'm really curious to see where the wide receiver room is as a rotation right now, because you've got a bunch of names that you're familiar with. Of course, added Mitchell Tinsley to that. A guy like Harrison Wallace is a guy. We posted something on our Instagram. I recommend you check it out. Crazy athleticism there from Harrison Wallace. So I'm really curious to see what that means for these rotations. Do you take some off of Parker Washington in order to get some other guys work, and where are you at as a room right now? So I don't think it's a big sort of storyline or anything like that, but they need to figure out those rotations, tighten them up, and figure out their most talented guys. By the way, Mason Stahl, as we talked about Costantini, Mason Stahl was a receiver of the day. He's a former quarterback, really athletic kid, ran a 4.4 for them back in camp when he was coming out of high school. So, that's an interesting change right there. And, you dangle that carrot in front of some of those other guys that maybe didn't get the recognition this offseason, and we'll see if it lights that fire.
Stahl, of course, nearly got a starting nod last season at quarterback as they were dealing with the flu outbreak, preparing for Rutgers. It sounded like when this team went to bed on Friday night, there was a chance they were going to wake up and have to turn to Mason Stahl. It didn't happen out that way, but now wide receiver, which is an interesting move. And just kind of to reflect on how different parts of the roster get impacted at different stages of the offseason, there are 3 new additions, scholarship guys at wide receiver since the Outback Bowl in Tinsley and Omari Evans and Caden Saunders. Meanwhile, we're talking about a safety room that could add 3-4 guys here in the next few months. So you're seeing different parts of this group impacted as the year goes on. Just kind of a reminder that it's a segmented process.
It's unbalanced, but it's college football. Yeah,
that's how it works. Yeah. So. Sean, speaking of building towards something, the recruiting never stops, and it's about to get a lot busier, which is a great thing because it's been a couple of years since we had tremendously busy springs, and we're going to see one for Penn State. March, you're going to see guys back on campus. Beyond that, you got the official visit window. Some names that popped up this week confirming they will be in attendance at Happy Valley at different points of the next few months. One that jumped off the page in a big way, Caden Proctor, 5-star offensive lineman out of Iowa. Sean Bach, who covers Iowa for 247 Sports, does a great job covering Hawkeyes recruiting. He had the report there. Penn State, one of 3 schools that are going to be getting a visit this spring thus far. And he's someone we mentioned as you want to get greedy, talking about what Phil Trautwein might be able to accomplish with this offensive line class. Throw that name into the mix.
And it's worth noting it's an unofficial visit. So he'll be paying his own way, which leaves the door open for a summer official. Like I said, I'm not bullish on Penn State's chances, but they're in the mix as one of those top 7 teams, and they're going to have the ability to get him on campus and try and make him feel comfortable. Of course, he's a 5-star offensive lineman from Iowa, so Iowa's going to be involved. I know Ohio State and a bunch of other big-time schools are involved as well, but Penn State's kept up that relationship. I mean, they've got relationships there. They've got it with Samson Okunlola up in Massachusetts, who's been on campus. Of course, Evan Link's a big target for them as well. So the difference this year is you've got guys in the boat and you still have targets out there for the offensive line. That's a good thing. It's a different thing, but it's a very good thing. And you're kind of shooting at the stars for Proctor, but why not? That's kind of where you're at with 4 in the boat. You're going to try and finish out as strong as possible, and 5-star offensive tackle, top 10 player in the country seems pretty strong.
And not just any visit in April. He's going to be on campus for the blue-white weekend. So if you're going to look to get a guy to make this trip and try to turn his attention into scheduling an official visit with you, it's a great scenario that could play out for Penn State. Iowa receiving an unofficial in April, as are the Oregon Ducks. So he's going long distance to the east.
Heck of a road trip.
To the west. Yeah. So some travel ahead for him. And then the official visits, we're going to start to see these get locked in Last year, it was all scrunched into 1 month in June. The year before, there were none of them. One that we know is on the books now for June, Florida running back. And if you check Sean's 2023 big board, you may have noticed pretty scant on the running backs, but Trayon Webb was on that, and he will be on campus the second weekend of June.
Yeah, this is a guy that's been on campus before. He came up for a game in November when he was still committed to Oklahoma. I think this is that was his second commitment. He's no longer committed to them. Georgia was in the mix as well. I'm going to cut his list to 5 schools soon. Penn State's going to be on that list. I think Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, maybe I think Florida just reoffered, so they're probably a 5th team, and maybe he'll add a 6th or something like that. Former high school teammate with Cam Miller at Trinity. Very, very talented back, a guy that's been all over the place and is on the board for a lot of programs. Long-time relationship with Jaywan Sider. That's why he popped up last fall. So they got an opportunity here. It would not surprise me if Webb would end up in this class, but I think a long way to go before we get to that point.
Yeah, but Penn State, a couple of Florida guys on the roster, Kevon Lee, Keziah Holmes in that running back room, Katron Allen coming out of IMG, but out of Virginia, and Slater has pulled this off before. It hasn't always worked out with guys who have come to campus and produced big, but John Dunmore is the guy who, you get him up for a weekend. It's a beautiful time of the year here as well. If you're a Florida guy visiting here in June, so we'll see what that can do if that moves the needle for him. Obviously, Webb committed to Georgia and Oklahoma in the past. This is a prime time premier kind of talent at a position that Penn State just brought in a couple blue chip players, and then elsewhere in the Sunshine State. Easy for me to say.
Careful,
Sean. Yeah, Damon Fagan is putting together the final touches on his favorites list, and he's got Penn State in that mix, Florida State, Georgia, LSU, Miami, and Ohio State among the other notable schools in there. Out of American Heritage High School, you talk about Trinity Christian Academy being a mainstay powerhouse in Jacksonville. Well, down in Plantation, Florida, American Heritage always competing for state championships. Fagan, one of a few Power 5 level talents in that defensive backfield last year for them. And he kind of fits that mold that we were just talking about. 6'2", 180 pounds, listed as a number 2022 safety. She's number 22 safety in the 2023 class by 247 Sports. But he's one of those guys that you say, if he's got the speed and that size, maybe he could play a little cornerback too.
Yeah, Fagan is just one of those talented guys. I mean, American Heritage puts him out every year. And I think they've got 3 or 4 guys from this last class in the defensive backfield that we're going to go FBS to the FBS level, and then I think they'll continue to have that in 2023. So it's just a ridiculous when you juxtapose some of these schools in Florida compared to some of the schools in the Northeast or some of the the states in the Northeast. Even it's pretty unbelievable. But he was another guy. They got those guys up in I believe the same game that Webb was at in November. Got them a chance to see an atmosphere up there. So I think it was pretty big for a couple of guys, left a lasting impression. And at that point, you're just sort of setting the table for trying to get these guys up the following summer. So we'll see if Fagan is one of those guys that gets an official visit this summer. They're going to continue to pound away at Florida. You've got Jaywan Sider on the staff. You've got Manny Diaz trying to dive back into his his roots down there. So you've got a lot going for you in Florida. It's just a matter of getting those guys to the summer so that you can get them up here and host them for a weekend.
Fagan was at the Michigan game that you mentioned, and he was with his teammates, a couple other 4-stars, cornerback Damari Brown and running back Mark Fletcher. Maybe those went under the radar a bit at the time. You're starting to see why laying that groundwork, getting guys on campus for game days, coming out the other side here starts to pay off. And we'll see if Fagan, when he sorts through his official visits, if he looks toward Happy Valley for that. Sean, anything else to add on the recruiting trail? Like I just said, February is coming to a close, which means recruiting is going to open up on campus again. And you talked about this. It's going to be open for a while.
Yeah, it's going to be open from March 1st when the dead period ends to mid-June. I think June 24th is when it officially shuts down for a dead period. So you've got an opportunity to get guys on campus. It's been nearly 2 years since Brock Bowers was in for one of the last visits before the pandemic. And
whatever happened to that kid?
No idea, probably a bust. But now it's a situation where Penn State's going to be able to have some guys on campus next week. Then they're going to go on spring break. So everybody goes on spring break. There's no, very few visitors, if any, pop up during spring break. And then as they get into spring practice, they'll have an opportunity to host guys, and they'll have guys in that are coming in every day.
Let's get over to our 5-star mailbag and bringing up a question that takes us back to this roster. And as we try to sort through position by position, perfectly timed one here. Which Penn State position battle do you expect to last the longest and maybe even into the season?
That's a good question because I think there's a couple of them that really don't have a surefire answer. I look at the middle linebacker spot. You've got Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King, two guys that they're high on in terms of talent, but very little experience. And you're replacing a guy in Ellis Brooks that played a heck of a lot of football for Penn State. So interested to see how this battle plays out, what you're going to do with the guys around him. And we, of course, expect Curtis Jacobs to move into the box as well. Does Charlie Catcher factor in at all? Do some of these other guys, does Jamari Budden factor in? So, there's not a ton of numbers at linebacker, so you're going to have to figure that out. And they still, of course, would like to add one through the portal. But I think there's still a big question mark, and I can see that one being one that plays its way into September.
The guard to me jumps out again. I mean, last year we saw one guy start in game one and then the other guy start the rest of the way. You've got another Ivy League transfer coming in like you did last year, and he's coming in May, so he's not here for spring ball. The kind of I don't want to say the wrench in the machine here, but the one thing that is a bit unknown is Salim Wormley coming off of that preseason injury last year. We've mentioned this several times, I think as recently as the last episode you did, and where he stood last year and as training camp was going on and September was approaching and pushing for a starting job at the guard spot before he was lost. So that's one that, that is a little scary to think about. I know everyone's kind of thinking about this offensive line and everything is really kind of revolving around that taking a step forward. Does Phil Trotwine find his guard with confidence by the time they're through 3 weeks in August, or are they getting on the road and going to Purdue and he's putting one guy out there for a couple series and the next guy out there for a couple series? This is me probably putting a lot of eggs in that Landon Tengwall basket, thinking that he's going to be a guy who is a full-time starter. And then you got Juice Scruggs at the center position, maybe giving Landon a little too much credit at this point of the calendar year, but I have confidence in where he's going to end up. So I'm still looking at that one guard spot, and because it's on brand for me, how about backup quarterback? You mentioned it. As much as we want to talk about the freshman QBs, you said they're slotted at 3 and 4. If Clifford gets hurt, if Clifford is inefficient, who is the next man in? And Christian Veilleux going to continue to try to stake his claim. I got to mention the backup quarterback. I just got to.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I think you're contractually obligated to do that. You could throw safety in there as well. With Jalen Reed and Keaton Ellis, and then you can add Zakee Wheatley into that battle. I think that's one where you're going to have to play out and get some reps, and it'd be interesting to see who gets the veteran workload this year or this spring. It always happens for those guys that have been around for a while. I think Jair Brown's in line for it, certainly. You're working at other positions like defensive tackle. Of course, Mustipher is a different story because of his injury, but you're working young guys through there. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But going back to your offensive line point, yeah, I mean, we're kind of, I don't want to say penciling in Landon Tengwall as the left guard, but that's kind of where we're looking. We're looking to the battle at the right guard in the spring, which you would think if Salim Wormley's ready to go full bore, which I don't see why they would, throw him in there as much as they need or as much as they would have to for a typical game week or something like that. Going against maybe Golden Israel Chumba and seeing how some of these younger guys can sort of handle themselves. And then, of course, Norzad shows up in May. We saw that happen last year, and Wilson did not, assume the starting role for the first game. I think Norzad's a better prospect. Certainly, we like Eric Wilson. He was very, very nice to us, but I think Norzad's a better prospect. He was elevated, by the way, to an 89 on 24/7 Sports rankings this week. So, yeah, I think they're going to find themselves in a position where they have not too many bodies, because you can't say that about Penn State's offensive line ever. But you're going to find, I think they'll find themselves in a better spot than they probably would entering March.
I will say one other area that people are probably wondering why we're not mentioning it, but they've used so many two-man personnel groups there at tight end. But I do wonder, with what we've heard about Theo Johnson, and certainly when I go through the winter workouts again, he's been getting called out a lot in a positive light by his tight ends coach, Ty Howell. We talked about all the physical tools that he has. He just looks different than anybody else in that room right now. And you've seen him in the open field now a little bit flashing. Theo Johnson's a guy that I'm very curious. Can he wrest some control at that position, or does it remain a very shared position? Because you've got Tyler Warren there. Of course, Brenton Strange was logging the starts for the most part, but that is just an area of the field where we want to see that group get more opportunities. But I'm very curious if one player, and I'm thinking Theo Johnson here, is going to put himself in a position to kind of control things just a bit.
Yeah, and Khalil Dinkins still at tight end, as per the shout out from Ty Howe today. We know we've got some people, myself included, that would love to see him at linebacker, but it's not the case right now.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Lions247 Podcast. Again, we're on the transition right now, going from winter workouts to spring ball. That's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We appreciate everyone for following us throughout this offseason. We're going to have real football to start chatting about as practice gets underway here in a few weeks. For Sean Fitz, for our producer, Lance Glenn, I'm Tyler Donohue. Thanks for listening to the Lions247 Podcast.